Welcome to Public Speaking with Peter George. Do you want to be calm, confident, and credible every time you speak in public? Then stay tuned as Peter and his guests discuss public speaking tips, techniques, and tactics that help you increase your impact, influence, and income. Here's your host, Peter George.
Leaders have a tremendous opportunity to affect change, to move people, to make a difference. And to do that, they need many skills. But one of them, maybe more than any other, of course, it's public speaking. As leaders, too many of us miss out on these opportunities because we don't spend the necessary time building these skills, thinking of them as soft skills as opposed to the power skills they actually are. In today's episode, Simon Trevarthen shares ways that you can use these skills to better communicate with others, providing yourself, your company, and the people you lead with a greater chance for the success you've been striving for. Simon T., as he's known, is a premier speaker on resilience, inspiration, and innovation. As a presenter, he has the rare ability to energize audiences while delivering personal, professional, and business growth insights. Known internationally as a top-rated keynote speaker, trainer, and virtual presenter, Simon helps clients innovate and create lasting change. Hi, Simon T. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Peter. Nice to meet you.
Simon, in leadership, public speaking is often thought as a soft skill. Why do you believe it's a vital skill?
That's a really great question, Peter. I think that when you look at truly great leaders, world-class leaders, they have all mastered the art of the spoken word. It is what differentiates them from the average. And so I believe to be a great leader, you have to be an exquisite communicator.
Speaking about being a great communicator, we've all experienced them, those ubiquitous business, academic, and professional presentations that really just aren't that good. Can you sum up what's wrong with so many of these?
Gosh, as a recovering corporate executive myself, like many of your listeners, I have suffered through many a PowerPoint or a keynote type presentation. I think there are three key reasons why most professional and, to be honest, most academic or you see conference type presentations tend to not hit the mark. And the first point is really this: your words, the words you choose to use. Many people default to jargon. They default to the language of that little group, that tribe, that speciality, rather than realizing they have to, if you want to influence people, speak more broadly and use words that truly impact them. And the really humble way to understand it, look at great communicators who are extremely sharp and intelligent men and women. Think of the greats from American history. Think of Lincoln. Think of, other presidents, Bill Clinton, Roosevelt, Obama. They're all trained lawyers. But do any of them sound like a lawyer? No. And that's the difference between speaking in clear, precise, active English, if you really want to understand Anglo-Saxon English, versus Latin words, which are there to obscure people. So it's the clarity of your words, the clearness of the meaning that actually gives you power. And so people default to jargon because it's what people think they should do and what they think they should say. So I think clarity is why many professional conversations, presentations fail. The next question is always speaking the truth. Now, that's a hard thing in a corporate environment to do, but the key here is speaking as much truth as you can say. People do not like to be, particularly in this time of COVID, when there's challenges, disruption, and people are nervous. They like to hear the whole truth or as much truth as you can say. It builds confidence and rapport with your audience. Building truth can be a simple action. We've all been to conferences where people hide behind the podium. And there's a strong correlation between podiums and coffins. They look kind of similar. But if you step away from the podium and actually walk towards your audience, you're actually signaling to them, I am vulnerable and I'm not reading off a script. I'm not making this up as I go along, but I'm trying to give you candid, honest truth. So clarity and truth is really important. And it can be your truth as well. People like to hear what you believe. And that's the third real piece of this, which I think makes an exceptional communicator, is they truly understand what they believe. They tell you what they believe. And even if I disagree with what you believe, I recognize and respect what you actually stand for. Leadership is about making a stand, not being part of the herd. So clarity, the truth, a statement of belief. I mean, if you want to look at the work of Simon Sinek, it's that why statement. Why should I believe you? Why should I follow you? And I think so many business and professional academic presentations hide behind jargon, hide behind big words when a short word would do, but also they don't tell you what they believe. And that's really powerful.
Okay, taking those three, and let's start with the last one first. Why do you think it is that they don't tell you what they believe?
I think it speaks to the question of true leadership. And if you look at great speeches, I mean, we're talking about the speeches which really rock and move history. You could think of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. You could think of Winston Churchill's Blood, Toil, Sweat. You could think of Kennedy's famous inaugural speech is ask not what the country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Those great speeches are founded on strong beliefs. You are absolutely crystal clear as to what those leaders stand for. And a great way to understand that is that a speaker, when they use the word I, is actually making a statement of leadership. Because when you say, I stand for this, I dream this, I believe this, you're actually saying, I am a leader. Now, that's not appropriate in all circumstances because there's times when you have to be a collective, us and you. But sometimes, particularly at times of uncertainty, particularly at times of disruption, people want to know what the leader believes. And that I statement is a very lonely place, which is why many people don't want to occupy that place. It's literally where you stand, where you're rooted in what you believe.
That's so closely related to truth, isn't it?
So let's go back to one of those examples of Churchill's famous speech, blood, toil, sweat. And it's not that he kind of pretended the truth. He didn't try to mask the truth. The fact was, by all accounts, they were losing. But his unremitting, undaunting courage said, I believe we have many months of struggle in front of us. That's the truth. I have nothing to offer you but blood, sweat, tears, and toil. Those are really rough words. I mean, sweat, it actually smells. He could have said perspire, but he didn't. He said sweat. We know what sweat, it's like the word actually smells, right? So he used those words to evoke the sensations he was trying to tell. And then he said, I have nothing to offer you. You asked me what my policy was, it is victory. He is unequivocal in who he is as a leader. And I think great leaders, and that's what we talked about when you look at the Nelson Mandelas and all these one who have really mastered the art of the spoken word, they're very crystal clear on what they believe. Now, I'm sure many of your audience is saying, well, I'm not in those kinds of situations. But even humble or huge, or what your leadership role is, be clear about what you stand for, your principles, your values, because that's what people resonate. They may not agree with your values, but they know where you stand as a leader and what you can be held accountable for, what we can look up to and who we can follow.
The first one you mentioned was jargon. And I'm of the belief that jargon and its close cousin, those 3-letter acronyms, do nothing but confuse. So your point about being clear.
Yep.
They confuse, but they also separate us.
That's how language is used in terms of power. And if you actually look at the history, I mean, just as a side note, the history of the English language is actually 2 languages bolted together. You have the Anglo-Saxon words and you have those Latin words. Now, the Anglo-Saxon words are those kind of gut, gritty words like swamp. You know what a swamp smells like. It invokes, it's sticky, it's mud, an Anglo-Saxon word. They're very guttural type words. Gut is, again, an Anglo-Saxon word. They're very short, they're very angular, and contrast with the Latin language, which is somewhat more precise. That's why we use it in medicine and law and all those things, is about power. Centuries ago, the peasants couldn't understand Latin, and that was a way the power was kept. If you think about it, why do you hire a lawyer? Because they understand contracts written predominantly in Latin so that they can interpret this language for you and give you a kind of vernacular kind of understanding. And that essence of jargon, I think, is so mixed up with it. It's about power. And it's about separating us, the normal people, from that specialized group. The danger, and I think as a speaker, is this. The only reason to open your mouth as a leader is to influence. A decision, a sale, a customer, whatever it is, it's to influence people, motivate people, influence people. And you cannot influence people if the language you use actually makes distance between you and the people you're trying to influence.
Speaking about power, what are the most powerful words in the English language?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. The most powerful words in the English language, and you can use this literally tomorrow, is humbly this: I. It's a statement of leadership. You is a call to action. And we means we're like comrade in arms. So let me just run through that and give you some flesh on those bones. So imagine I've just been hired as the executive to a new company. And people are nervous. Who is this new guy coming in? So I'm now, because I know there's uncertainty, want to be a leader. So I could say something like, I stand before you today as your new leader. I'm here to execute and drive a new mission, a new strategy. I take accountability for that. I look for your support, but that is what I am here to do. Clearly, I. So if you look at the speeches of Churchill, they're all I statements. I have a dream is a statement of leadership. It's my dream. I, not we, I. Now, if I just change that to you, I stand before you as your new leader. Together, you and I, we're going to make this strategy happen. We're going to make this happen. You have a role to play in making the strategy and executing. You have a role to play in making this a success, and you have a role to be in making it accountable. Again, it's a call to arms. And Kennedy's famous inaugural address was exactly that, a call to arms. It was to mobilize other people, and it did it in that generation. You think of the Peace Corps and all those kind of things. It, again, got people off that you have a responsibility. Flip the coin again to we. I stand before you as the new leader. We have a responsibility to come up with a new strategy and execute it. We are accountable. And by using we actually shrink the distance between you as a leader and the team. It's us in this together. So when you understand how to use those three words, if you need to be the leader, and there are many times when you have to be the leader, use I. If you're trying to motivate people, throw it to you, because you can talk to 1 or 1,000 people and use the word you, and you're talking to each heart independently. And we is really that embracing as a group, as a team, as a movement is something different.
Okay, so those are 3 strong words that everybody should remember. But then again, as the saying goes, silence is gold. As speakers, how can our listeners know when to be quiet?
You know, Mark Twain once said, the right word may be effective, but no word was ever effective as a rightly timed pause. And when I coach leaders and executives, it's amazing how many of them, particularly if they're nervous, want to actually be like a motor mouth. They want to take one big breath and just pour through these words. What I tell them is, actually look at your speech, if it is written out, and literally put an X at the margin when there's the real key point. So like you can imagine, go through the various sentences, that's a key point, that's a key point. And then I tell them at the end of the sentence, literally write pause, pause, pause in capital. You're not going to read that out, but it forces you to read those words, take a breath, be silent for a moment, and allow your audience to absorb what you've just said. And if you really want to give it some real kind of like, supersize that, add 5 pauses. Because silence gives gravity to your words. And so if you correctly time your silences, it is immensely powerful. By the way, and here's the other little trick, those few seconds enable you to scan the audience and see if they're really receiving the message through their body language, their faces, and if they're connecting with what you're saying. And it's such a powerful tool.
It's a great time to do it. Simon, what makes up a 3-minute speaking masterpiece? I know you talk about this a lot, and I'd like to hear more about it.
So where this comes from is we've all been in professional circumstances. Let's say you're a consultant, or you've been allowed to pitch an idea to a board or whatever it may be. Because you're an executive, a pitch an idea or a product. And you're on the agenda for an hour. That was the agenda. You get there, they're late, the conversations run on, and they say, oh, I'm sorry, you've only got 5 minutes. It happens all the time.
Yes, it does.
It's life. What I like to say is, you will always lose page 9 in your speech, in your paperwork. Something will always go wrong. So the power of this is you should, on a dime, be able to turn what you wanted to say into a 3-minute talk, allowing for 2 minutes of questions. And humbly, it's this. Go back to what people would mobilize and inspires them. Start off humbly by saying what you believe. What do you believe? What do you believe about this product, this phenomenon, what's happening in the company, whatever you believe. Then tell people the 3 things that you're going to tell them about this product, this service, whatever the phenomenon is, the 3 things. Go through them 1, 2, 3, and always lead with that. Remember, every time you open your mouth, you're there to influence, a call to action. Nobody wants to go into a boardroom and listen to the presentation of 622 recommendations. People's blood drains out of their bodies. What you want to do is listen to 3 poignant points. So everybody, you've read the report. There are 622 recommendations. I'm going to bucket those into 3 areas. They're to do with governance, they're to do with our product mix, and they're to do the markets we're accessing today. But when you actually look at those 3 points, you can play with that in so many different ways. So a great way, particularly if you're in a pitch situation or if you're presenting a big idea, is start big. It's the inverted pyramid that journalists use, and go small. So your first point could be talking about the market, a few bars on the market. What is the market today? The second could be the unmet need of the customer. What is the typical customer, and what is an unmet need? And by the way, the third piece is our solution to the customer's need. But you could also use this if you worked in, for instance, government. You could say, I'm here to discuss California's education system. I'm going to talk about the new reforms to the state, what it means to a school, and what it means to a student. And you're basically using that to really drill down to what it means to ordinary people and the impacts it'll have on them. You can also play with those 3 points. And again, it's something you can do impromptu, off the hoof, as it were. You could use it as a time question. This is where the company was. This is where the company is today. This is where the company is in the future. You could use it to compare. This is where a big company we compare ourselves to, a direct competitor, us today. And think this actually, if you've ever go back, and if your audience wants to go back, look, and you can search, I think, on YouTube, Steve Jobs' speech introducing the iPhone. It's entirely 3s. It's based on 3s. He talks about, it's basically what we were before. We invented the Macintosh, the new computer, the iPod. What we're doing today, which is truly credible, he talks about 3 things. Then he talks about the iPhone in terms of it's a communication device, it's a phone, and it's an internet device as well. So 3, 3, 3s. And here's the magic of 3s. It's memorable. Because that board meeting has also had 6 other presentations, which went on with 120 slides, your 3 points and your action point, and it could be asking for more budget or money or an endorsement, will be remembered because you can write it on a napkin and people can understand it and they can take it home.
3 show up throughout our lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
In writings, in talks, in illustrations, 3s show up consistently.
Yeah, it's a fundamental number because it's easy to remember. There may be some biological reason to it, I'm not sure, but it is so fundamental. Listen, you can remember the 1, 2, 3. It's a simple step process, and you can bucket anything into it. And it really goes back to, Peter, what you said before, which is a real bane of my existence, I'm sure yours, which is people confuse PowerPoint, Keynote with a presentation. They are not a presentation. What they are is a presentation document. They are not a presentation. They're a document. They actually support your presentation. They are not the presentation. So many times organizations put hours into the presentation document, but don't spend any time figuring out what they're going to say. And the worst, I mean, this is the worst sin of all, is they actually read the slides to you. I mean, they must assume you're functionally illiterate because you can't read the slides. That tells you the person has done no thinking as to what they were going to say, only what they were putting on the paper.
2 things bother me about that. One is someone gets assigned a presentation, and the first thing they say to someone else is, I have to do a PowerPoint presentation. Well, first of all, it doesn't have to have any slides, but like you said, there's no such thing as a PowerPoint presentation. There's just the deck, the document. And then they go home or to their office or wherever and say, what am I going to put up on the screen? And that's what they base their presentation on.
Yeah.
The facts and figures they have in their computer, that's the foundation of the presentation as opposed to what the audience wants or needs to know.
There's no doubt that this software can be useful. I mean, you can use it very evocatively around graphs or data. But again, test your data. There's nothing worse. And it's always a clue that someone hasn't done their homework. When they say something, you can't really read it on this slide, but that tells me they've never actually practiced it. And to your point, often in many organizations, the slides are assigned to someone, a staff member. The leader is given to them literally as they run into the meeting. And that's why they're just reading them off. And that speaks to a really key point around truly great communicators. Just like John Lennon, they wrote their own stuff.
Right.
I mean, speech writers are incredibly powerful, but every great leader knows it has to be their words, and you have to shape it into your words. Now, there are exceptions, I know. If you're in a legal situation or an HR situation and you literally have to read it verbatim, that's a very special case. But in most cases, you have to tell the story the way you speak, not what someone else speaks.
Now, you talk a lot about leadership, and it used to be a really common belief that in business, storytelling was less than professional. How can our listeners become more effective leaders through better storytelling?
That's a great question. Well, let's step back for a moment. Stories are fundamental to us being human. They are how humans actually connect. We understand complexity. We understand complex ideas through storytelling. When you go home at the end of the night and you speak to your lesser half or better half, whatever it is, what do? You tell stories about the day. You can complain, but you tell stories. You unpack complexity with storytelling. But the misnomer around storytelling is it's once upon a time. And that's not good storytelling. Good storytelling in a business sense is understanding the tension between emotion and data. If you are able to tell a story about your customers, the barriers your customer has to buying a product, let's say, and then support that with data, you've got a strong case. And I think storytelling in that vernacular in a business setting can be extremely powerful because what it does, and this is the difference, by the way, to the other 5 people who've just presented, is they're presenting in a black and white TV with the jargon and all those words. What you're doing is moving not only to color, maybe to high definition. And stories embellish what you're saying, but also support your saying. You can't meander with some strange anecdote that means nothing. But if the story is directly connected to the meaning, the intention, and the point you're trying to influence, it supports what you're trying to accomplish.
Now, I've often heard that speakers should inject all 5 senses into storytelling. How do you go about that?
Again, it goes to that idea of the kind of like the high definition color. If you're talking to an audience about food, you could talk about it in terms of data. It'd be a very drab presentation. But what people want to know is, what does it taste like? What does it smell like? What is the anticipation of the taste? What does it look like? What's the presentation like? And the same is true of great business presentations. Go back to the Steve Jobs. They were extremely orchestrated events that hit all of your senses. They were visual. Talk about the design, the beauty of the design, what it feels like in your hand, the colors, all of those things. It transports the listener, the participant, the audience to your story. Tell me what it felt like to be in that experience, that story. I was listening to a speech given by Oprah Winfrey, and she was talking about all the days that she did the Oprah show. And she was saying, at the end of the day, I used to crawl home. I very much doubt Oprah was literally crawling along the highway on the curb. But think of the word crawl. By the way, a great Anglo-Saxon word, crawl. What does it mean? Exhaustion. And that transports the listener to the story and builds them as part of the picture that helps you build that color, those all 5 senses.
Simon, business presentations often consist of us standing up and spewing data at people. What's the trick to effectively incorporating data into your talks?
There's nothing wrong with data. Data supports your message, but it can't be the message. And I think a good rule of thumb is to think about the emotion you're trying to impact, the influence, what is the question of the data, and the data that supports that. So find the emotion you're trying to think about. I'm here today to talk about the fact that customers are having problems buying our product because of the pandemic. They can't buy in our stores. They physically can't get in. The doors are locked. That's, again, I'm using color. The doors are physically locked. You can rattle the doors. So now what I want to show you is what our competitor is doing with this online function. And here's the data. So I've given you the emotion, I've given you the impact, and the data now supports that. Data does not convince anyone in itself. What influences is the emotion tied with data.
So why do you think it is that we get up there and just vomit that data on people? Is it just not knowing?
I think it's habit. I think it's expectation. That's what we do. I think it's also many times people haven't seen a better way. I think if you look at great communicators in any field, it could be in IT, or it could be in design, or it could be in logistics. Those people are the people who can talk about logistics or supply chains to a layman in that they understand it. And they use data to illustrate the meaning and intention of their words. And I think that's the key. It's about the words you use, how you arrange it, and you construct the meaning, and then the data that supports it. And so I think it's bad habits. It also goes back to something we mentioned before, Peter, which was people often just do the deck. And the deck's full of data, well, actually, most people are never going to read the deck because it's rarely given out in time. B, you're assuming that everybody can interpret the deck if it's data sheets. And 3, even if they can interpret the data sheets, why would you give them a haystack to find a needle? Want to get rid of the haystack and say, here's the needles, the 3 needles I'm going to talk about, A, B, and C. Now, look at the data sheet, and there's a lot of information here, but this column here, this is the number you need to think about. And then talk about why. Because it's the why and the surrounding meaning and the interpretation that is as important as the data itself.
Simon, you've spoken a lot about speaking for leadership and to become a better leader. what about our listeners who are understanding what you're saying, but in the back of their mind, if not the forefront, of thinking, yeah, but I'm too nervous to get up there and do this way?
Fear is essential. Again, I'll quote Mark Twain. There are two types of speakers in the world, the nervous and the liars. And the fact is, every speaker should have some butterflies. We've all seen rock bands and great bands that have been playing the same song for 20 years and they're tired and they no longer want to do it. Why? The zest has gone because they don't want to be on stage anymore. The fact is, those butterflies is basically adrenaline kickstarting your body. So the butterflies are something to be embraced. The key, though, when you think about it, is how do I embrace those butterflies? Well, there's a couple strategies. What is your rocket playlist? In the last 5 minutes before you have to speak, or you can even sing the song to yourself if it's in an ante room, what is that song that really gets you pumped, gets you motivated, gets you ready to actually go out, even if it's an interview room, which is a stage of 3, actually gets you pumped to actually do that? What is the self-talk that you can have in the bathroom stall? Do your Wonder Woman pose to actually, get in the mode that this is going to be incredible. Because most audiences are not going to actually tear you down and drag you off. Most audiences are very understanding. But the key thing is, again, think about how you get into that mode. If you're more meditative, you can breathe. If you're more spiritual, you could say a prayer. But again, think about how you breathe and actually get into the mode, because that will help you overcome those fears. Lastly, practice, practice, practice. The fact is, like I said, Peter, you will always lose page 9. You'll get up there onto the podium and page 9 is not there. What do you do? And that goes back to then thinking about your 3 humble points. The wild thing is, when you speak based on, because you're now engaged, you'll probably speak better than when you were reading or when you were referring to notes, because the written language and the spoken language are cousins, but they share the same language, but they are cousins, quite distant ones at that.
That's true. I know that when I write as it should be. The word would be cannot. I don't know if I've ever said the word cannot other than in an example in my life. It's always can't. So my way of speaking is certainly different from the way of writing.
Totally. And you'll see this if you've ever looked at really good speeches and how they're written, even speech writers, they have sentences probably no more than 12 to 15 words. Why? Have a conversation with your best friend tonight on the phone. Listen to how many words they use per sentence. It's probably between 10 to 15. Again, going back to the original, why are so many professional and academic presentations kind of sometimes wonky and don't hit the mark? Is because they're literally reading out the written word with sentences 30, 40, 50, 60 words. And you run out of steam, and you run out of emotion, and you run out of breath, and the words just fizzle. The audience can look online. The Gettysburg Address, one of probably the greatest American speeches of all time. I think the entire thing is 283 words. Each sentence is literally probably no more than 12 words a sentence. Its power is its brevity. And it packs so much in. And by the way, it's not repetitious, it's melodic in many parts of that. Is because it actually is designed to be spoken, not really to be read, albeit it was in newspapers after, but it's designed to be spoken. And you could have imagined after the time, at an age when many people were not literate, there would have been one person reading that to other people in a train station or somewhere and actually reading those words. Again, it was designed and written to be spoken, not to be read.
And as everybody says about that day, no one can tell you a darn thing about the 2-hour presentation that came before it.
Right. And there is a really interesting kind of side story to that. It really broke the mold because people used to go out as entertainment to go and see long-winded speeches for 2-3 hours. And Lincoln actually delivered this thing, I think it was 5 minutes. And the photographer on the day thought he had 2 hours to take the shot. And you can imagine those days, it was the big wooden box with the black cape over the thing. He thought, I've got 2 hours to make the photograph. So they actually missed the photograph. So the only photograph we have is Lincoln amidst a crowd walking off the podium. Again, it changed the way we think about words. It changed the way we think about speeches. It has resonance 150 years later, when all those 2-hour speeches are long forgotten.
He was a master at it.
Razor sharp lawyer.
Yes.
Razor sharp lawyer. He could have spoken in legalese to the cows come home. What he spoke and his influence was his kind of jovial language, his ordinary language. And all his kind of anecdotes are all that kind of jovial, kind of country language. But he was a brilliant man. And I think that's the jump of exquisite communicators, truly great communicators, is they have this vast knowledge. They have this great intelligence, but they're able to translate complexity into something you and I can understand, we can remember, and we can act upon.
They know how to connect with their audience.
Totally.
Simon, thank you for joining us and sharing your expertise and experience. Where can our listeners learn more about you and the services you provide?
Look me up on most social media platforms, Simon Trevarthen, Trevarthen. But the best way to get a hold of me is to go to my website, which is elevateyourgreatness.com.
Elevateyourgreatness.com. That'll be in the show notes. Thanks again, Simon. It's been a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
That's a wrap of another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tune in Monday when you'll hear another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George, and again Thursday for your next episode of Quick Bites, public speaking tips and techniques you can digest in 5 minutes or less. Until next time, remember, when it comes to speaking in public, you've got this.